Opportunity that you have after your daughter's death, that's what you choose to leave us with. And all I can think of is, thanks, Mom, for nothing.
I'd been struggling for a long time. I had all these ideas in my head of what I wanted to do as a mom.
Hayden Panettiere sat across from Gayle King in May 2026, smiling, promoting a memoir, insisting she was healthier than she had been in years. 3 months later, she was gone, found unresponsive in a South Carolina apartment at just 36 years old. Now, Gayle King has broken her composure on live television, admitting the thing longtime fans had quietly feared since that final interview aired. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what King said, why it matters, and what it reveals about the final months of Hayden Panettiere's life. The final interview that now feels like a warning. Rewatch the clip now, knowing what came after, and it plays completely differently. On May 18th, 2026, Hayden Panettiere sat down with Gayle King on CBS Mornings to promote her newly released memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning. And the two women had a conversation King later described as candid, covering motherhood, acting, and mental health. At the time, it read like a comeback moment, a former child star reflecting on hard years and choosing to speak about them publicly instead of hiding. Then, on August 16th, Panettiere was found dead, and that interview instantly became something else entirely. A document people started replaying frame by frame, looking for clues they had missed the first time around. Gayle King did something most broadcasters would not have done so soon after a tragedy. She went back on air days later and admitted the truth she appeared to have been sitting on since May. Off camera, Panettiere told her she felt she was in a good place, yet King came away with a different impression entirely, later telling reporters outside her New York studio that the actress seemed still wobbly and clearly still struggling. That is a striking admission from a journalist who had already recorded and aired the interview weeks earlier without flagging any public concern at the time. It suggests King saw something in that studio conversation that never made it into the broadcast itself, something that only became worth saying out loud once tragedy made silence feel irresponsible. During their May conversation, Panettiere told King she was better and healthier than she had been in a long time, a claim that now sits uncomfortably next to what King has since revealed about her private impression of that same day. You have to sit with how much weight Panettiere's public image carried heading into that interview to understand why King's comments landed the way they did. This was a woman who had spent years being extremely open about opioid and alcohol addiction, undiagnosed postpartum depression, and the devastating decision to give her only daughter full custody to her ex-fiancé. A memoir promotion tour is, by design, a moment of controlled narrative, a chance to frame your own story entirely on your own terms before anyone else gets to frame it for you. That is exactly why the follow-up comments mattered so much once they finally came out. A reporter asked Gayle King directly whether there had been any signs Hayden was struggling back in May, and a TMZ report on that exchange described King confirming there were no dramatic red flags in the moment, while making clear that everything did not look fine either, since her heart sank the instant she heard the news of Panettiere's death, precisely because that private impression from May had never fully left her. That gap between a polished interview and a private worry is where this entire story really begins. It is worth remembering just how much Panettiere had already disclosed publicly before that CBS Mornings appearance, which makes King's hesitation feel even heavier in hindsight. Fans who had followed Panettiere's story for years were not shocked by the idea that she might still be struggling. They were only shocked that someone as visible as Gayle King was now confirming it after the fact, rather than months earlier when it might have mattered more. So, before getting into what happened next, and why King's admission set off a much bigger public reckoning only days later, you need to understand exactly who Hayden Panettiere was and how she got to that studio chair in the first place, because none of what follows makes sense without that context. The life Hayden Panettiere spent years trying to explain. Long before any of this, Hayden Panettiere was simply a kid actor with an unusually big career for someone so young. Born in 1989 on Long Island, she started working professionally before she was even school age, appearing in commercials and eventually voicing a young dinosaur in the 2000 animated film Dinosaur, before moving into live-action roles in Remember the Titans and Disney's Ice Princess. Her breakout role came in 2006 as Claire Bennett on the NBC series Heroes, a part that made her one of the most recognizable young actresses in America almost overnight and introduced an entire generation of viewers to her work. She followed that success with Juliet Barnes on the ABC and CMT drama Nashville, a role that earned her 2 Golden Globe nominations and reintroduced her as a serious dramatic actress rather than just a former teen star, while also appearing as Kirby Reed in several installments of the Scream franchise across more than a decade. By any measure, Panettiere had built the kind of resume that most child actors never managed to sustain into adulthood. Behind that resume, though, her personal life was unfolding with far less polish than her filmography suggested. She began dating Ukrainian heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko in 2009, and after an on-and-off relationship that included a brief split in 2011 over long distance, the pair got engaged in October 2013 and welcomed a daughter named Kaya the following December. What should have been a joyful new chapter instead collided with something Panettiere did not fully understand at the time, an undiagnosed case of postpartum depression that she has since said left her overwhelmed in ways she could not explain to the people closest to her. By 2018, that struggle, combined with addiction issues she was privately battling, led to one of the most painful decisions of her life. She gave Klitschko full custody of Kaya, and in a 2022 appearance on Red Table Talk, she explained that she did not fully understand the arrangement was permanent until her daughter was already living with her father overseas. She described signing those papers as the most heartbreaking thing she had ever done, a decision she stood by publicly, even as it clearly haunted her privately for years afterward. And today's coverage of how Panettiere spoke about her daughter in her final months laid out that timeline in detail. Around the same time her relationship with Klitschko ended, Panettiere became involved with Brian Hickerson, and that relationship brought a very different kind of public scrutiny entirely. Hickerson was arrested multiple times on domestic violence charges tied to incidents with Panettiere between 2019 and 2020, eventually pleading no contest to 2 felony counts of injuring a spouse or cohabitant and serving jail time as part of his sentence. Panettiere later spoke publicly about the abuse specifically to help other women recognize similar warning signs in their own relationships, and Newsweek's profile of Hickerson traced how their connection stretched across 8 complicated years right up until the weekend she died. What made Panettiere different from many former child stars navigating public struggle was her willingness to keep talking about it rather than retreating from view entirely. She spoke openly about hitting rock bottom with opioids and alcohol, about the guilt tied to losing custody of Kaya, and later, after her younger brother Johnson died suddenly in 2023 at age 28 from an undiagnosed heart condition, about the grief that reshaped how she saw her own mortality going forward. Her memoir, released just months before her own death, was meant to be the culmination of that openness, a full accounting of a complicated life told entirely on her own terms rather than through tabloid headlines. Panettiere's public life was never limited to acting either, since she spent years working as a spokesperson for the Whaleman Foundation, an ocean conservation group, and appeared in the 2010 Oscar-winning documentary The Cove, which exposed the dolphin hunting industry in Japan, earning her the Genesis Weiler Award from the Humane Society along the way. That advocacy work sat alongside everything else she was juggling privately, and it painted a picture of someone constantly trying to channel her platform towards something meaningful, even while her own life felt like it was unraveling behind the scenes. Her brother Johnson's death in February 2023 added an entirely new layer of grief to a life already shaped by loss. And Panettiere later spoke about carrying guilt she could not fully shake in the months that followed. The two had worked together on screen years earlier, and losing a sibling that suddenly, at just 28 years old, reportedly reshaped how Panettiere approached her own recovery and her relationship with the idea of mortality going forward. That is the full context sitting underneath the CBS Morning's interview, and it is exactly why Gayle King's later comments carried so much weight once they finally surfaced publicly. Understanding who Hayden Panettiere really was makes it much easier to understand why her sudden death hit so hard across Hollywood, and why the circumstances surrounding it turned into their own separate controversy almost immediately afterward. The sudden death that shocked Hollywood, the call came in as a reported cardiac arrest. On the afternoon of August 16, 2026, emergency medical services responded to a residence at Judson Mill Lofts in Greenville, South Carolina, where Panettiere had reportedly been temporarily staying, and found her unresponsive inside the apartment. Despite advanced life support measures administered on the scene, she was pronounced dead at 2:32 in the afternoon, and ABC News confirmed that timeline came directly from a statement released by the Greenville County Coroner's Office. An autopsy performed the very next day found no signs of trauma that contributed to her death, but the official cause and manner remained officially undetermined pending toxicology results, a process that authorities cautioned could take several weeks to complete. That gap between what happened and why it happened opened space for exactly the kind of speculation that follows any sudden celebrity death, and this particular case had extra fuel almost from the very first hours. Brian Hickerson, Panettiere's on and off partner, was reportedly present at the residence when she was found, and his brother Zach later confirmed in a statement that Brian administered Narcan after discovering her unconscious, a detail that pointed toward a possible overdose, even though authorities have never officially confirmed one as the cause of death. Emergency dispatch communications reportedly referenced a possible overdose as well, though CNN's own reporting was careful to note that a 911 dispatch description is simply not the same thing as a coroner's final ruling on cause of death. Adding to the complexity surrounding those final hours, prosecutors revealed during an open court hearing just 3 days before Panettiere's death that Hickerson had reportedly been arrested twice in 2025 in Los Angeles, entirely separate from the earlier domestic violence case tied to their relationship years before. Reports have also indicated that federal agents, including those connected to the DEA, became involved in examining the circumstances surrounding her death as part of a broader look into where any substances found at the scene might have originated. None of this has translated into a confirmed cause of death, and it remains important to stay precise about that distinction rather than assume the worst before investigators finish the work still in progress. Some outlets covering the case have pointed to a broader opioid crisis affecting the area around Greenville, framing the investigation into Panettiere's death as part of a wider look at how prescription and illicit substances have been moving through that part of South Carolina in recent years. That context does not confirm anything about what happened to Panettiere specifically, but it does help explain why federal investigators were pulled into a case that local authorities initially treated as a straightforward medical emergency. What is not in dispute is the emotional shockwave the news sent through Hollywood almost instantly. Tributes poured in from people who had worked alongside her for years, including Viola Davis, who co-starred with Panettiere in the 2016 film Custody, and sent healing prayers to her family and daughter shortly after the news broke. Her father, Skip Panettiere, released a statement describing her as an incredible light and a force of nature who brought immeasurable love and joy to everyone who knew her, while Vladimir Klitschko's statement from Ukraine, shared through Deadline's coverage, called her death a shock, even though the two were no longer partners, noting that nothing would ever erase the place she held within their small family. That outpouring of grief, however, quickly ran headfirst into controversy once Panettiere's estranged mother released her own public statement, one that many people felt landed very differently from the warmth offered by nearly everyone else close to the actress. That single statement is exactly what pushed Gayle King from quiet sadness into the pointed, headline-making comments that gave this entire story its dramatic second act. Gayle King's reckoning and the public backlash that followed. Here is where Gayle King's earlier admission about Hayden's final interview collided head-on with something far sharper. On August 18th, Leslie Vogel, Panettiere's estranged mother, released a statement to NBC News in which she said her daughter had sadly lost her way and wished things had turned out differently, adding that she believed Hayden was now with her late brother Johnson and finally at peace. For a lot of viewers who had already been primed by King's earlier comments about Hayden's visible struggles, the statement read less like grief and more like distance, a mother describing her daughter's decline from the outside rather than mourning her from within it. Gayle King clearly felt the same discomfort watching it unfold. The very next morning, on CBS Mornings, she read Vogel's statement aloud to her co-hosts and did not hold back her reaction, telling viewers that reading it made her think only one thing: "Thanks, Mom, for nothing," and adding that it saddened her to see what Vogel chose to leave behind as her final public words after her own daughter's death. Her co-host, Vladimir Duthiers, pushed the moment even further, pointing out that Hayden had spent years publicly acknowledging her own failures and struggles and was no longer able to respond to being characterized that way by anyone. And the Daily Beast's coverage of that CBS Mornings segment captured the exchange between King and Duthiers in full. King did not stop at simply criticizing the tone of the statement either. She specifically called it unseemly and contrasted it directly with the warmer tribute her own co-hosts noted had come from Panettiere's father, arguing that Vogel had been handed a real opportunity to honor her daughter publicly, and instead chose something that read to many viewers as a final rebuke rather than a farewell. Given that Panettiere had written candidly in her own memoir about a toxic and complicated relationship with her mother, one that eventually led her to fire Vogel as her manager years earlier, King's frustration landed for a lot of fans as validation of something they had long suspected, that the family relationship was far more strained behind closed doors than any red carpet appearance ever let on publicly. Vogel did not stay quiet in response either. In an interview published just days later, she said she was very hurt and deeply disappointed by the backlash coming from King and others, pointing out that no one had reached out to her directly before criticizing a woman who had now lost 2 of her children, referencing Johnson's sudden death back in 2023, as well as Hayden's more recent passing. She explained that she was holding her own grief at bay in order to handle practical matters first, telling reporters plainly that she did not have the luxury right now of being weak. And The Hollywood Reporter's coverage of the growing public exchange between the 2 women captured that full interview. So what does all of this actually reveal once you strip away the headlines and the back and forth between 2 grieving households? Gayle King's admission was never really about a single interview or a single statement taken in isolation. It was about a veteran journalist, someone whose own Wikipedia page details more than 4 decades interviewing everyone from sitting presidents to global pop stars, and who was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people back in 2019, choosing to say publicly what a lot of longtime fans had already sensed quietly while watching Hayden Panettiere's final months play out from a distance. The signs were subtle back in May and had become impossible to ignore by the time August arrived, and King's willingness to say so out loud, even at the cost of a very public feud with a grieving mother, ended up confirming what so many people had quietly suspected long before the headlines finally caught up to them. Hayden Panettiere spent her adult life being remarkably honest about her lowest moments, hoping that honesty might one day help someone else going through the exact same thing in silence. In the end, it was that same honesty, replayed endlessly in one final television interview that gave the people who loved her one last chance to see the truth clearly before it became too late to reach her. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.